G'day guys, Mike with the Outer Circle, and today's episode is a getting started in Horus Heresy with a bit of a twist. Because we're going to be looking at the Solar Auxilia, and rather than going through every unit and every rule available to them, I want to just break down a few key rules and explain some, I guess you can say, facts about the Solar Auxilia, and give you some list building recommendations, what I think you can do to really get the most out of Solar Auxilia lists. So, first things first, when it comes to the actual army and its core warlord traits and such, you're not going to get anything that's actually very useful to you. It seems like it on the surface, but you've got to understand that many things, like for example, the Ever Vigilant, giving you the warlord's initiative bonuses and +1s and all that to moving and running, isn't going to mean much. Most units that you join are going to have the close order type. They're not going to benefit from this sort of thing. Your Stoic Defender, granting pinning attacks to your shooting. Again, there are not many units that you can join your Warlord to that's going to benefit. Okay, a large unit of las guns, las rifles may be able to put out a decent amount of shots, but unless you're fighting a like-for-like opponent, you're not going to pierce their armor. The Armored Legate is going to give you a Leman Russ command tank, which, it's a command tank. It's going to be better than if you didn't have a command tank, obviously, and it's going to buff it to some degree. This is probably the most useful one, but for probably a more boring list. And the last one, of course, is the Bloody Handed, +1 to combat resolution within 12 inches, which is not very helpful to this army for reasons that we'll go into shortly. Now, close order subtype. I briefly mentioned it there, but in short, your unit coherency is very, very close on everything. Close order is a 1-inch proximity instead of a 2-inch proximity for unit coherency. This makes you substantially more vulnerable to blast and template weapons. Although many of your units can get armor that is essentially hardened against this, you'll get rerollable saves against blasts and templates. Unfortunately, there's one big problem in the Heresy 2.0 game system, and that is Strength 6, AP 4. It's everywhere this edition. And weapons that are Strength 6, AP 5, like Volkite Culverins, for example, will still absolutely scythe through units. It means that things like Medicaid attachments and such become a lot less viable in the Solar Auxilia, as they do in Militia, because you just don't have the survivability. You're not going to be getting to make armor saves, and because of the doubling out your toughness, you're rarely going to get to make feel no pain saves. You're fishing for fighting against bolt guns, and it's never a wise thing to basically pray that your opponent plays a very nice and very soft and very, loving and kind list. The other big thing with Solar Auxilia is what they call tercios. So tercios are what are being sold currently in the infantry squads. You'll see there's a little command section, and then there's 2 big platoons of las rifles, for example. The way this works is the tercios are purchased. You purchase a command, and then you can buy as many infantry squads as is within allowance to join them. Typically, it's around 3 to 5, depending on different things that can be unlocked. And this also applies to armoured vehicles, specifically your Leman Russ squadrons. You can buy a command tank, and then you buy squadrons that work under that command tank, all as a part of a single heavy support choice. In infantry, it's las rifle tercio, so you get a tercio line command, and then you get las gun squads that work for them. And this is what primarily will compose your army. So keeping in mind, these infantry squads are going to be your core troops choices most of the time, and that you need to buy many, many plastic miniatures to make this up. This means that 2 to 3 of the starting box typically will supply all of your troops' needs. Now, caveats to this, the starting box set does not give you the units that you really want necessarily in the form of the Drakassan. That's just wasted money because it's a terrible unit this edition. Again, for reasons we'll go into. And also, it's giving you the Aethon's Heavy Sentinel, which is not ideal in, again, the starter set. The next thing we need to talk about is the cohort doctrines. So the doctrines are similar to Marine Legiones Astartes traits or rights of war. They essentially allow you to mold your force and to morph it in a certain direction to take on certain attributes to represent different forces from different planets. So, for example, you can take Auxilia Velaris Tertios as troops if you take these solar pattern cohorts. But there's going to be a con to that, and this is the way that the cohorts work throughout. There are some that give you bonuses if all of your guys are blocked up like a early modern period line of battle. So think, the British Redcoats, for example, Battle of Waterloo type battles, big infantry columns, shoulder to shoulder. There's a bonus for it. But of course, you're incredibly vulnerable when you take a force like this. There are also different sections that are designed around armoured tercios or feral pattern cohorts. There are some that go around the penal pattern cohorts, but none of these are particularly great. Some, for every ability that they will add, they will take away something that you kind of wanted to keep anyway in many circumstances. So it's a very underwhelming thing to take these doctrines. They're thematic, and I will never say don't take something thematic, but the idea of me going through and making these lists with you and explaining how these armies work is that I'm trying to tell you what to spend your money on if you want to get the most bang for your buck on the tabletop and when buying miniatures. I'm not trying to tell you how to win tournaments and all of that sort of thing. I just don't want you to waste your money on units that you fall in love with, only to have your heart broken when they're immediately fail to perform after spending dozens or hundreds of hours working on them. I think that's a fair consideration to make. So my advice to you is really just ignore the doctrines and go for the basic force. Now, when it comes to creating your army, a few specific units to talk about. First up is the Lord Marshal of the Force. So this is the guy who's bottom left in this image, holding out the sword. This is your top dog, your big boy. He's going to unlock the doctrines for you if you want to take one, if you really want to go all in on that theme. But again, remember, Strength 6 AP4 is everywhere. Your infantry will die in droves no matter what you do. But that Marshal has an incredible amount of war gear options open to him. You can make a very, very powerful basic human. And I really want to stress that point, basic human. Because although he'll be very, very strong, incomparable to the rest of the army, he's only on par with low to mid-tier Marine characters, which means if you face serious opposition, which you will on the battlefield, expect him to go down very quickly, especially against forces like, say, the Mechanicum. Mechanicum has many, many brutally strong units that they can bring along that will do him in. He just doesn't have the strength, doesn't have the fortitude to take on some of these units. All he has really is a wide variety of war gear and an impressive invulnerable save, and that is not enough. He also has access to this command squad, and the command squad has a great many attributes to it that make it useful to the army, but nothing that says that you need it in every situation. It's partly there for fun, for theme, for painting. It does all of these things quite well, and you can get a few special weapons into it that might be quite useful. But on the whole, the HQ area is very dry when it comes to Solar Auxilia. I like to think of the HQ and troop sections as the tax that you're paying to buy the units that will win you games. Then we get into the elites, and the elite section, the big one's going to be the Velaris. So Velaris, we have a few different choices here. We have Velaris that are, we have our command section, our storm section, our vanguard. So we're going to get gunners with lots of Volkite weapons that can be upgraded to carrying their storm axes, or we're going to get rotor cannons. And rotor cannons, yes, they're pinning weapons, and there are slight advantages you can give yourself, such as getting the Fear Special Rule army-wide if you take a certain doctrine. There are negatives that are associated with that doctrine, however, that make it rather dubious, but you have the ability to do so. But you are throwing out a very low strength nil AP firepower, it is unlikely to cause wounds that actually get through against the Astartes. It can happen, yes, and there will be lucky rolling, as luck is always a factor in these games, but you cannot, absolutely have to stress this, cannot rely on this to actually perform in that way on the battlefield. It's just not the reality of the situation. Then we need to look at the actual Velaris with the axes that I mentioned. So Velaris with the axes, you go, look, their weapon skill is on par with Marines. They're going to get certain bonuses from the weapon that's going to put them onto sort of Marine levels. This is true. But it's putting them onto a level that can compete with basic tactical Marines. The minute you run into Marines that... Something that we don't talk about enough in this hobby, I'm going to slightly diverge here in the video, is that many members of armies, especially Marines, are what we call sacrificial wounds. Sacrificial units. Take, for example, an assault squad. An assault squad has, let's say, up to 20 Astartes in it. And there might be an apothecary attached as well for good measure. Those Astartes are a delivery platform for the power weapons that that unit can take quite often. And the most common weapon I'm seeing this edition, and this varies from player to player, so it's not true in all situations, but it's the Power Maul. And what is the Power Maul? It's going to hit on 4s against the very best the Soul Auxilia have, 4s. That's pretty good. It's only going to get better from there for the Astartes. It's going to wound on 2s, and any wounds it does are going to be instant death wounds. Now, if you have 5 of them in a charging assault squad, because remember, they move considerably faster, 2.5 times faster than this unit does, at that sort of speed, and that number of attacks, they can potentially kill most of the Tercio before the Tercio gets to attack back. And then they're going to be piling in all the lesser models, the chainsword and bolt pistol characters in the unit, or models, not characters, and those models are then the ones who are also going to receive the wounds in return from the Soul Auxilia, because who wants to take out their power weapons? This means that charging or being charged by Space Marine Assault Marines is very, very deadly to even the most elite Soul Auxilia units, no matter how tempting it is to take the elite Soul Auxilia units. However, this is not all doom and gloom, because I do think that Velaris are very, very good, and there are doctrines that allow you to take them as your troops choices. So my advice is this: if you're taking Velaris, try and take the Volkite option. Ignore the Flamers, ignore the Axes. I think both of those situations are what one could call a honey dick. It is luring you in, false sense of security, and then jumping you. You don't want to end up in this situation. And using transports to get your Volkites to where they're needed, to jump out and spray the high strength of those weapons en masse for very cheap, is probably the best and most efficient way to use the units in this army. And rotor cannons can play a part in this. A unit or two is not going to break the balance, break the bank, but is also going to be nothing to write home about. So that gets through that section of the elites. Our other choices are, of course, the Medicae section, which is, well, the Feel No Pain bonus, the damage mitigation roll, is not very good on them. You're not able to take very many of them, and, well, you're not going to get it very often because Strength 6 AP4 is just so prevalent. So it's one of those, it's okay, but it's not an auto-include for me, even at a relatively low price point. Then we have the Surgeon Primus Avos Jovan, and he really shines in an allied force because his ability can help any one infantry unit. You can use it for things like Terminators in your force to keep them around on the battlefield. But as far as Soul Auxilia goes, he only provides a little bit more benefit than the Medicae. So he would be my first point of entry, and then using him as Medicae as required. The Charite Ogrins, they are just so close to being a hit, but they miss. They're gorgeous models, they're huge as well. They're on 50mm bases, not 40mm bases. They are monstrously large. They're the size of some dreadnoughts in previous editions, in fact. And they have a decent enough stat line. They have many attacks and rage and all that, but they're too slow to often get the charge off, which means they don't get to make a lot of benefit of their charge bonuses. Their attacks also are not really going to chop through the really heavy stuff you need to chop through. And added to this, we also have the issue that they are more expensive than Cataphracti Terminators each. And the last little problem we have is that the artillery that does exist this edition, that is so useless against Marines, that is so useless against other forces, is incredibly effective against them. Because Medusa batteries will cause instant death. Vindicators will cause instant death. The Typhon will cause instant death. And that means 40-point models that are getting no armor save and just get removed from the battlefield. That is a very bitter pill to swallow for an incredibly expensive in financial terms and points terms little unit. If you're going to take them, if you're wedded to the idea of it, especially for something like Theme, 1 unit and 1 unit only, and may as well make it a big unit. Get the most bang for your buck out of it. This then takes us into the troops area. And when it comes to the troops, the Velaris are obviously better than the Lasgun guys. So if you can get Velaris' troops through a doctrine, great, but most of the time you are going to be looking at the Lasgunners. And I treat the Lasguns as an unavoidable tax that must be paid, an unavoidable toll. And you buy your little command section and then buy as few of these units as you can really get away with. I think 3 Tercios is plenty in any points level. Up to 3k, 3.5k, maybe even 4k. 3 infantry Tercios is plenty, as in 3 troops choices of infantry Tercios. So I'm thinking here a small command section and 2 squads of Lasguns. 3 sets of that. That's all you really need. And I'd advocate for the Orox as their transport. Now the Orox, which in this image is the bottom right, is the much better transport than the Drakasan above it, for a few reasons. First of all, the Orox, well, the Orox is only 30 points. The Drakasan is 175 points. 175 points, 30 points. So we're talking something that is 6 times more expensive, but only has twice the troops carrying capacity. Is it better armoured? Unquestionably. It's armour 13 on the front, 12 on the side, versus the 11-11 on the Orox, which is basically a Rhino. It has better weaponry. It has the Gravis Las Cannon, and you can swap that to the Demolisher Cannon, but if you do so, you take the transport capacity down to the same transport capacity as the Orox, and you also get to cost 50 points more for the sake of it. This is not ideal. The trap with Solar Auxilia is having a vehicle like the Drakasan and saying, I think I can use this to shoot enemy units. This invites things like reaction fire and therefore return fire. And it's also a big chunky vehicle, and if people know you have a huge squad of infantry inside, that makes it much more of a target versus a little Rhino-like vehicle that's scooting around on the battlefield. When the Orox blows up, and when the Drakasan blows up, the consequences are the same for the occupants. Strength 8, AP 4 hits. That means on a 2, a model dies. And you're going to roll a dice for every single model that's on board. When you have 22 guys on that Drakasan, that inevitably will go down because it's not a super heavy vehicle, it is just a vehicle. A single lucky las cannon shot at the very start of the game can do it. When it goes down, everything dies, and a lot more points will die inside of it for no gain. Versus the Orox, it's such a small target. Who wants to waste all the points of a 10-man las cannon squad shooting at a 30-point armoured vehicle? Nobody wants to do that, especially if they look across the table and you have 10 of the things. No, you use the Orox to move your lasgun squads up on objectives, hop them out, move the Orox out in front of the squad, turn it side on, and use it as line of sight blocking cover for the unit behind. And if it does blow up, as long as it's not completely destroyed, as long as it's just hull pointed or damaged to such condition, it's going to remain in play. It'll be dead, but it'll remain in play. And then, well, it's a line of sight blocking terrain. So perfect for your army. That's the sort of thing you need to help you survive. The Draan, it is a bigger model and it can do this as well, but I don't think that for 175 points it's worth it. For 75 points, I would say it's a must-take vehicle, but unfortunately it's just not that. And firepower-wise, there are upgrades you can give to the Orox that make the Orox actually a kind of decent gun platform once it's actually detached its squad. You can give it a multi-laser still, 10 points. Yeah, okay, it's now a 40-point vehicle, but a multi-laser being fired, who wants to waste their reaction against a 40-point vehicle? No one does. So this is ways that I think that the Orox is a far superior vehicle than the Draan when you are list building. Downside is, it's an expensive vehicle, financially. And it's also in resin. It's a fantastic kit to put together. I've done it myself, and I loved it so much I designed an entire vehicle range of STLs based upon it. But it is a factor to take into account, whereas the Draan comes in the basic box set with all the infantry that you're going to want in the first place. So you're going to be left with that Draan. It's a funny set of situations we find ourselves in here. Then we get down to the fast attack, and in the fast attack you're going to find aircraft. Aircraft are in a really funky place in the Horus Heresy, and I'm going to be doing a video on it possibly this week, probably the next. But don't take them. That's my advice. If you do take them, they're not going to return a value that's worth the money that you're going to spend on them and the stuff around of having to play them, as well as earning back their points on the battlefield. It just doesn't happen. None of them perform particularly well this edition, and the sort of flyers they can go up against are incredibly strong this edition. The most common flyers you'll see around are things like marine xiphons, and they will eat these things for breakfast. And because of the way that some of the air rules work, you can both declare that you're doing certain things, and neither flyer will ever participate in the battle. It's a whole lot of roll your eyes situations that are going on here, but my advice is don't take the flyers. When it comes to the other units that float around in fast attack, of course, it's going to be Sentinels. And Sentinels are not something that I really advise taking. They're not terrible. In a bigger game, yes, they may be worth using. But compared to Marine Dreadnoughts, which are sort of the closest analogue to them, they are far, far inferior. You just don't quite have the power output for the stats of the unit, and they're kind of easy to kill. So it wouldn't be where I first put my points. Versus something like the vehicle you can see on the top right in this image, the Carnodon. Now this is a financially very expensive unit because it is a Forge World resin vehicle and all of the headaches that entails. But you're getting a Predator tank for all intents and purposes, and you're getting it in the fast attack slot. And it also gives you the way of taking something that can put out a lot of firepower without it being yet another Leman Russ, which is something we'll get back to later. Something I've said many times in this video. Now, a fast vehicle with many las cannons, especially twin-linked las cannons, is kind of a big deal. And you also have the option of completely Volkiting this thing out, turning it into something that can throw out a massive amount of anti-infantry firepower. Again, you're fishing for people to fail their saves, but it's still an ungodly amount of firepower, and you can do it from a 3-tank squadron quite easily. And it utilises the fast attack slot really well. Something I didn't mention earlier as well is that with the new book that's come out, there are certain Sentinel variants, the light Sentinels, that can be put into other units. But at 18 points a model, that sounds ideal. They've got decent enough stats. They've got okay weapons, multi-laser or heavy flamer, that sort of thing. But financially, no, they are not going to be a cheap unit, and you're already paying for a very expensive army. I just don't think they're worth including as part of Tercios, by the by. Then we get down into our heavy support. And this is where things really start to shine, because you have a variety of heavy support choices available to you, especially with the Legacies of the Age of Darkness PDF, but really it's just the Leman Russ. The Leman Russ with the Vanquisher Battle Cannon and the Coaxial Autocannon is probably one of the best tanks in the Horus Heresy as a game, because with night fighting, especially, which means -1 on your to hit rolls, most units in this army will be hitting things on 5s. So having a vehicle that is able to twin link an incredibly powerful weapon using the autocannon, which if it rolls a hit, automatically twin links the Vanquisher battle cannon, that's incredibly powerful. It means that the Vanquisher battle cannon becomes a far more reliable weapon, especially when it's not night fight. And being able to dish out incredibly long range shots, 72 inches with Strength 9, AP 2, and Brutal 2, means the Vanquisher cannon is nothing to sniff at. A pair of Lehman Russes can pretty much eat away a Contemptor Dreadnought in a turn. 3 Lehman Russes will definitely do it. And because of your Tercio system, you can get multiple squadrons under the command of a single Lehman Russ for a single heavy support slot. And because of this, it means you don't have to squadron them. And this is huge, because squadroning is a major problem in 2.0. The coherency for squadrons has been brought down to just a couple of inches away, 4 inches, and damage that occurs to one vehicle, if it exceeds what that vehicle is capable of sustaining, it flows onto the next vehicle. So if someone has a really lucky roll against a squadron, they roll 3 explodes results, guess what? The entire squadron is destroyed. This doesn't happen anywhere else in the game outside of wounds overflowing onto infantry within a squad. But these are vehicles, they're not infantry. It doesn't happen to dreadnoughts, it doesn't happen to other characters in the army. So this problem really hurts you, and the ability to spread out those Lehman Russes and use up your Force Org slots more efficiently by taking many tanks under a single Force Org slot, very, very important. The last thing to look at is going to be your artillery. Yes, you can take them, Basilisks and Medusas in vehicle form, and yes, that artillery is going to be a great performer for you against yourself, because it can't hurt Marines. The Basilisk and the Medusa both are AP4 weapons now, Strength 9 and Strength 10, and they're going to be AP4, which means they'll carve through Militia, carve through Solar Auxilia, they'll carve through some parts of Mechanicum, like Tech Thralls, but the pinning on it, never going to go off. You know, it's just such a fall from grace for these incredible heavy weapons. They have barely more damage output than bolt guns do in most situations, and you're just relying on people failing rolls against you. And of course, you're inviting things like reactions and return fire and such against the vehicles. So they're not something I highly rate this edition, and they do need a ground up rewrite, but the writers refuse to do so for a number of reasons. And to touch back on the vehicles one last time, with the Lehman Russ and the Vanquisher, I understand nobody wants to be taking armies full of a copy and paste vehicle with Vanquisher and autocannon. So there are 2 other weapons I'd like to give honourable mentions to, and the first is the Plasma. The Plasma weapon that's available to you is pretty damn strong. The execution of Plasma is going to be 60 inches range, and it can kill Marines pretty decently. It's no Vanquisher, but it's a solid weapon. The other option is going to be the Volkite Macro Saker, and this one is essentially just trading decent firepower for weight of firepower. It can throw out quite a lot of Volkite shots, at a pretty decent strength too. And taking these sort of units, yes, it handicaps you somewhat over taking the Vanquisher. It's the less gamey option, but it's potentially going to be more fun for you and the opponent, because you both get to throw a lot more dice around. And in a good way, because you can actually do damage with it, as opposed to firing 40 las guns, where you get to throw a lot of dice, but it doesn't feel very rewarding on the other side. The Volkite Macro Sakers on multiple Lehman Russes, that will feel alright to do. So that's my advice. Vanquishers, Plasma Executioners, and Macro Sakers. They're the vehicle weapons that you really want to be chasing. Don't upgrade your Pintle weapons. They are less effective than the hull-mounted weapon and the ones that are in your turret. All you're doing is spending points on vehicles that should be kept as cheap as possible so you can get more things. And that is really, in a nutshell, the Solar Auxilia. But there's one category that we've left out, and that is the Lords of War. And this one's actually quite simple. There is one Lord of War, and only one Lord of War you should be looking at. Do you want to guess what it is? It's going to be the one super heavy from Forge World that's still sort of made out there, and that is going to be your Stormhammer. The Stormhammer is pretty good this edition. It was always a good vehicle, but super heavies, especially Imperial Guard themed ones, have really suffered. And some vehicles like the Malkador that used to be a super heavy pale in comparison next to the Leman Russ, being larger, more expensive financially, more expensive in points, and having a worse firepower output, as well as being able to take it in much smaller numbers. There's no reason to use the vehicles. So Leman Russ all the way. This same trend happened in Lords of War. You have the Baneblade, you have the Shadow Sword, vastly outperformed by the Fellblade and, of course, the Fellshield. And really, the only Imperial Guard style super heavy Lord of War that made it through unscathed, more or less, is the Stormhammer. And that's because its weaponry is fantastic. The Stormhammer cannon and that twin-linked battle cannon, yeah, they'll do work for you. That Stormhammer cannon especially. So if you need the Lord of War, you're going to take one, you're going to spend the points, you're running an armoured force, that's the one for you. And that's it really. That's the list building considerations for the Solar Auxilia. Take a few squads of las rifle tercios, take your command unit, take your Lord Marshal, don't spend all the points on him, don't buy all the gimmicks, buy a ton of Oroxes so you can move everyone around quickly on the battlefield, form big walls of Oroxes to block line of sight from the enemy, hold those objectives with your las rifle tercios, and use your armoured assets to do the killing. One other little thing I should mention at the end of this video, because I've skipped it to this point, is the rapiers. The rapiers are decent, but you struggle to find the arcs of fire that you really need with the weapons. The multi-lasers don't have the output or the damage to work for you. The quad mortars don't have the output or the damage to work for you. You're really just chasing for rapier laser destroyers at that point. And, well, rapier laser destroyers are good, but you're paying a lot of points for those laser destroyers. 25 points on top of 35 points base. You're up at marine levels and you're only ballistic skill 3, 4 on the carrier itself, which is decent. It's a rough time to be living in. And I think you're better served in your heavy support by taking those armoured vehicles. But if you want to take the rapiers, by all means do so. They are a decent choice. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. I know this is not the most enthralling video, but need to get made because right now there's a lot of people out there contemplating Solar Auxilia armies and building Solar Auxilia armies. And these are the things I think are most pertinent if you're going to do so. So keep my little points in mind, and thank you all for watching. Thoughts and comments below. If you think I got anything majorly wrong, pop it down in there. But if you're just disagreeing on something, as in, well, this one time my Charite Ogryn soloed a Marine army, that's great, but it's very anecdotal. Give me something more to work with. See you all next video.